There is plenty of skepticism going around when it comes to the future of cloud gaming. This is a technology that's been attempted in the past, but it's never been implemented elegantly enough to gain a lot of traction. But Google aims to change all of that with their upcoming cloud gaming service Stadia, and major platform holders like Microsoft and Sony are also planning to join the fray with next-generation consoles. Whether you like it or not, there's definitely a huge push for cloud gaming right now, and it is going to be a major part of gaming within the next few years, though only time will tell whether this catches on. I, for one, think that given internet speed requirements, the world just isn't ready for something like Google Stadia. The infrastructure just isn't there right now. When you look at average internet speeds across the world, it's clear that internet still has a lot of catching up to do before cloud gaming can go mainstream. But another key factor is the business model that cloud gaming services provide, and that's where I think Google Stadia especially falters. The more I hear about Google's plans for the service, the less ideal it all seems from a consumer perspective. The biggest problem is that Stadia doesn't quite live up to what a lot of people were expecting from video game streaming when it comes to how it charges consumers and what services it provides for that money. The way a lot of people were thinking of when it comes to cloud gaming was that it'd be a lot like Netflix. Many expected you'd pay a monthly fee for a subscription and that you'd get access to an entire library of content. So kind of like Xbox Game Pass, except everything's cloud-based. But we learned not too long ago, back in June 2019, that while there is a monthly fee via a subscription service called Stadia Pro, you don't get access to a full library of games. Instead, you still have to pay full price for the games you want to play on top of that subscription fee. Imagine if Netflix not only charged you monthly, but also made you pay full price for TV shows and movies and such. Granted, Stadia will eventually launch a basic version of their service that's free, but that does come with drawbacks like games being limited to 1080p resolution and sound being limited to stereo. Features like 4K resolution and 5.1 surround sound will only be reserved for those who sign up for the $10 a month Stadia Pro. To make matters worse, more recently, Google Stadia product director Andrei Doronichev further affirmed that their cloud gaming service is not intended to be like Netflix. The following information comes from the official Stadia subreddit, where Doronichev participated in an AMA session a few days ago on July 18, 2019. One user asked for clarification regarding free games for Stadia Pro users, as there is some confusion and mixed messaging surrounding that topic. In response, Doronichev had this to say: "To be clear, Stadia Pro is not Netflix for games, like some people have mentioned. A closer comparison would be like Xbox Live Gold or PlayStation Plus. The Pro subscribers get 4K HDR streaming, 5.1 surround sound, exclusive discounts, and access to some free games. Roughly one free game per month, give or take, starting with Destiny 2. Well, I should point out that Xbox Live Gold and PlayStation Plus are a lot cheaper at $60 a pop if you buy an annual membership, and they both usually offer more than one free game on a monthly basis, whereas Stadia Pro is twice that at $120 a year and will only offer roughly one free game a month, give or take, whatever that means. But more importantly, I think not having that Netflix-style business model is a huge crux for this cloud gaming service. Without that, a lot of people are wondering why they'd ever choose purchasing games on Stadia, given the many potential cons that significantly outweigh the pros. First of all, game consoles actually allow players to download and own their games, whereas with Stadia, all the games are located in data centers, and players are paying full price to simply access them. Which means that if there were to be some kind of outage on Google's end, which actually happened not that long ago, players would lose access to all their purchased games until that outage ends. Or if, God forbid, Google were to shut down Stadia because it didn't end up panning out, players who bought games on the platform would lose all access to all games alongside any progression made in them, unless certain games do have cross-save features. The lack of ownership would be less of an issue if Stadia charged a reasonable monthly fee for an entire library, but having to pay full price for individual games that you don't get to truly carry around with you is far from an appealing proposition, especially for hardcore gamers. Something else that was recently recently confirmed by Stadia boss Phil Harrison is that game prices for Stadia will be the same as any other platform. When Eurogamer asked Harrison about potentially charging less for games on Stadia, the response he gave was, "I don't know why it would be cheaper." So all Stadia really is at its core is just a regular storefront, but with all the drawbacks associated with cloud gaming, rather than being a subscription service that offers a large selection of games at a pricing model that some may find hard to resist, stuff that would compensate for cloud gaming's drawbacks. All paying $10 a month for Stadia Pro grants you is access to 4K and surround sound, which are built into game consoles and PCs without the compromise of lofty internet connection requirements and without having to pay a monthly fee. Now, the way Phil Harrison justified charging the same price for cloud games as digital and physical games was by highlighting the benefit of being able to play any of these cloud-based games on any screen. That's the main draw of cloud gaming. Play high-fidelity games even on meager hardware as long as it has a screen and a solid internet connection, be it TV, PC, laptop, tablet, or smartphone, with progress carrying over across any of these devices in a pick-up-and-play manner. The idea is that there is no need to spend money on new expensive hardware or hardware upgrades because all of the processing and updating takes place on Google's end through their data centers. But the question is, does that ultimately outweigh the disadvantages of cloud gaming? Is the ability to play on any screen worth the complete dependence on a good and stable internet connection, on customers having to potentially upgrade to a more expensive data package with higher speeds and incurring higher monthly charges? Even from a portability standpoint, you'd be hard-pressed to find decent Wi-Fi in public settings in most countries and regions, which means that people would have to rely on high-tier, unlimited data plans for their smartphones. And even then, 4G or 5G coverage isn't 100% consistent, varying from location to location, where something like a Nintendo Switch can literally be played anywhere you go without having to worry about external technical variables other than battery life. The drawback there is, of course, that the Switch is less powerful in terms of hardware. Google's data centers have all the power you need to power high-fidelity AAA games without any issues, but I'd rather play games at lower resolution and at lesser graphics and be able to play them consistently than have the offer of high-fidelity graphics on games that I might not actually always be able to play. Another important factor is that internet service providers tend to impose data caps on their services. That cap usually tends to be around 1 terabyte per month, which in the context of how much data Stadia consumes is not a whole lot. Assuming you play games at 4K 60 FPS, that's 35 megabits per second as per Google's official infograph, which is 15.75 gigabytes per hour, which means it would only take a mere 65 hours of gameplay to eat up that monthly 1 terabyte data cap. And then at 1080p 60 frames per second, which I would say is the baseline resolution for games, at 10 megabits per second or 4.5 megabytes per hour, it would take 113 hours of gameplay to reach that 1 terabyte monthly cap. And this is all without considering the fact that households will use internet for other applications as well, from checking emails to streaming HD and 4K videos. I can tell you for a fact that many hardcore gamers play way more than 65 to 113 hours per month. Now, Phil Harrison was at one point asked about this particular concern by website GameSpot back in June 28, 2019, and the response he provided was baffling to say the least. He insinuated that internet service providers will take care of customers. Here's what he said. The ISPs have a strong history of staying ahead of consumer trend, and if you look at the history of data caps in those small number of markets, and it's actually a relatively small number of markets that have data caps, the trend over time when music streaming and download became popular, especially in the early days when it was not necessarily legitimate, data caps moved up. Then with the evolution of TV and film streaming, data caps moved up, and we expect that will continue to be the case. ISPs are smart, and they understand that they're in the business of keeping consumers happy and keeping customers with them for a long time. Yeah, okay, what world does Phil Harrison live in? ISPs caring about keeping customers happy? You mean the same entities who supported the FCC's repeal of net neutrality, a legislation that put ISPs in check and ensured they wouldn't have the ability to throttle internet speeds or block access to certain websites and streaming services unless customers pay extra? Those guys, ISPs like Comcast, AT&T, Verizon, among many others, don't give a rat's ass about keeping customers happy. Their bottom line is to do the bare minimum so they can then rake in as much money as possible. Is Phil Harrison really naive enough to think internet service providers will increase our data caps out of the mercy of their hearts, that they won't just charge more for increased caps? When asked about this concern, Phil Harrison responded by saying that the emergence of 5G is the solution, with a statement that reads, quote, "There's a very interesting additional dynamic happening in the internet market, which is the evolution of 5G, particularly in what's called fixed wireless, which is not necessarily running 5G on your phone, but as a way of bringing 5G into your home. All of the 5G fixed wireless business that are up now, that I'm aware of, have no data caps and are very, very high performance. So that's introducing a competitive dynamic. $50 a month, that's what Verizon fixed wireless cost is for minimum 300 megabytes per second and up to a gigabit. It's pretty good value to me." Yeah, we'll see if unlimited data packages actually hold up, because historically, ISPs who tout unlimited data eventually tend to add a cap after some time has passed. I've used everything from Comcast, Verizon, T-Mobile to AT&T, and I've seen time and again how unlimited data packages have been phased out over the years after their introduction. There are also plenty of stories out there of people with unlimited data whose speeds do get throttled after a certain amount of data has been used. While the future of 5G remains unwritten, internet service providers have historically always been stingy and greedy fuckers, and I'd be hard-pressed to think that they'll go out of their way to provide affordable solutions for gamers who are interested in cloud gaming just because they're feeling charitable. These are corporations with a proven track record. They're not in the business of being charitable, they're in the business of nickel-and-diming consumers. And sure, Phil, to you, an executive worth millions of dollars, $50 a month for just high-speed internet may seem like pocket change, but the average person who makes the average wage may not be able to afford that, on top of paying for Stadia Pro and on top of paying full price for cloud games that demand high speeds for adequate game streaming. There's a reason for why the average internet speed across the world is relatively low in most countries, because a lot of people will choose the cheaper internet plan to save money, and the most commonly used low-tier internet plans do come with data caps on top of less than ideal speeds. And for these people, yeah, cloud gaming is just not an option. Phil Harrison also addressed calculations made about how few hours of gameplay would take to reach that internet data cap, about which he said this: "I've seen the math calculations that people have done. If you take 35 megabits per second, it's not always 35 megabits per second because we use compression. There will be some times when actually it's using significantly less data than that, so it's not correct to multiply 35 megabits per second by the number of seconds that you play." Well, in that same vein, I imagine that there could be times during more chaotic and visually demanding game scenarios when data usage will peak beyond 35 megabits per second, so wouldn't it all average out anyway? And even assuming that at 4K resolution, games will usually use a little less than 35 megabits per second, I'll remind you that even at 1080p 60 frames per second, which requires 20 megabits per second, it only takes a little over 100 hours of gameplay to reach that 1 terabyte cap. The fact of the matter is that data consumption will never be low enough that hardcore gamers who play hundreds of hours every month will be able to game for as long as they'd be able to on a regular console without possibly eating up their monthly internet, unless they start paying premium for high-speed unlimited plans, or unless internet service providers decide to actually prioritize consumer needs, which I'm not going to hold my breath for. So yeah, if you ask me, Phil Harrison is making a rather poor case here, and add that on top of Stadia not being a Netflix-like service, and not even pricing their games lower than the average storefront to make up for how untested this technology still is, and you've got a service that feels untenable and uncertain in its current iteration. Speaking of uncertain, it was also revealed back in June in an interview with GamesRadar that there will be no beta testing for Google Stadia. There will be no way for consumers to try out the service and see how well it works under their unique circumstances before deciding to pull the trigger on purchasing games on Stadia or to sign up for Stadia Pro. A question that I've seen a lot of people bring up is, who is Stadia even intended for? Hardcore gamers won't want to deal with potential internet connection issues, maxed out internet caps, higher input lag, and compressed visuals and audio that may disrupt gameplay, on top of a lack of game ownership that prevents the absence of DRM or the ability to mod games, and that gives consumers less control in general, at least not if they have to purchase cloud games at full price individually, rather than being able to pay a reasonable monthly fee to access a full suite of games. As for casual gamers, on top of also having to deal with internet speeds and caps and potential issues there, I'm not sure they'll care much for the types of games Stadia is hosting, these complicated, high-priced games that involve using a proper, dedicated controller rather than simple inputs like touchscreen controls on smartphones. Saving casuals the trouble of having to buy expensive new hardware and hardware upgrades every few years won't be enough to mitigate the barrier of having to pay full price for complicated games on top of a subscription fee to get the most out of the service, on top of potentially having to pay more for better internet. Look, the point of this video isn't to say that there's no place for cloud gaming in the future. I think cloud gaming is an inevitable part of the video game industry's future, and much like how services like Netflix can coexist with Blu-rays, I think cloud gaming can coexist with dedicated game consoles. But it all starts with making offers that make sense from a consumer perspective, and I don't think Stadia is quite there for either hardcore gamers or casual gamers or non-gamers. The existing internet infrastructure leaves me doubtful that the service can run efficiently for most households, and the notion of having to buy individual games at full price on untested technology that prioritizes access over ownership seems woefully unappealing. I'm curious to see how Sony and Microsoft will push cloud gaming when they launch their next-gen consoles. The thing is, unlike Stadia, both of these companies do already have some kind of Netflix-style service. Sony's got PlayStation Now for $20 a month, or the far cheaper $100 one-year subscription, which grants unlimited access to over 750 games across multiple generations of PlayStation through a combination of both streaming and direct downloads, and Xbox Game Pass for $10 a month grants unlimited access to almost 200 games, all of which can be directly downloaded. If both of these companies can follow a similar pricing model for their cloud gaming ventures alongside their dedicated console endeavors, they'll already be way ahead of the Stadia, though they too will be faced with the problem of an internet infrastructure that's just not advanced enough yet. But at least they would actually offer a true Netflix-style streaming service for games where, while you don't get to own the games, you get access to a vast volume of titles that will allow you to play more games for cheaper, which is a trade-off some people who can't afford to spend $60 on owning every game they're interested in might be willing to make. Subscription is all about volume over ownership, about making that trade-off worthwhile, and Stadia has neither, which makes it rather pointless from where I'm sitting, and the novelty of playing on any screen may not be enough to look past that, unless Stadia's game streaming turns out to be impeccable and extremely usable, which doesn't seem entirely likely for most people because, again, internet infrastructure, speed, caps, and coverage just aren't at that point yet. Only time will tell though. Stadia will launch on November 2019, so we'll find out soon how well it truly works. I myself pre-ordered a Founders Edition so that I can test it out and report back to you guys. Hopefully Stadia proves my skepticisms wrong when I get my hands on it, but until then, I'm not sold at all on how Google is handling their service currently. So yeah, there you have it folks, my general thoughts and opinions about all things that have been said about the Stadia lately. I'd love to hear what your take is on Stadia and what we know so far about the service in the comments below. With that, I would like to end this news update and discussion video. Thank you for tuning in. To be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Yong Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Yong out.